Imagine working in a prison where every step echoes louder than it should, and where a simple silence can be more terrifying than any scream. Now, visualize a hallway, number 3, that everyone constantly avoids. Guards would change shifts just to avoid walking through it. Inmates preferred solitary confinement to being transferred to a nearby cell. There was no blood, nor any visible evidence of recent violence, but there was something that no one could explain. A whisper, a presence, a deadly secret that, even without being spoken, shouted for attention within the moldy walls of that forgotten block. For years, this hallway was known by a nickname that spread among the inmates like a curse: the Ghost Corridor. The reason: a particular cell 3A where the most disturbing stories concentrated. Those who dared to enter, even for a few minutes, came out changed. Some would scream, others would cry, but the majority simply refused to share what they had seen. And perhaps the most frightening thing of all is precisely what was never said. A silence that weighed tons. A faceless terror. A collective trauma disguised as rumor. Have you ever gone through something you couldn't explain but felt was too real to be ignored? Sometimes the mind tries to protect the body by omitting certain truths, but it doesn't always succeed. And that's exactly what happened when a young psychologist decided to investigate what lay behind the reports from that place. He didn't believe in legends. He didn't believe in ghosts, until he heard for the first time what sounded like breathing while being alone. What you are about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps change your view of silence forever. They say fear has a smell, that the human body can perceive danger even before the mind comprehends it. In Corridor 3, this instinct seemed to always be on alert. No camera worked there for long. Equipment would freeze. Lights flickered inexplicably. Even the sniffing dogs refused to enter. Cell 3A became a symbol not only of isolation, but of something greater. A possible injustice, a hastily filed case, and a portrait of a system that sometimes prefers silence over confronting its own mistakes. This is criminal psychology in its rawest form, when behavior speaks louder than words. And in this case, the words never came. Stay with me until the end, because throughout this video, you will understand why so many professionals in criminology refuse to discuss this case publicly. We will talk about psychological profiles, manipulation, institutional negligence, and the emotional impact that still haunts former employees of this penitentiary. But first, we must return to the origin. Before all of this became history, there was a specific day. A day when an inmate was taken to Cell 3A, and no one imagined that this transfer would mark the beginning of the silent collapse of the entire block. And it was at that exact moment that the whisper began. At first, no one paid attention. A light sound, like a current of air crossing an invisible crack. But the reports began to accumulate. Guards swore they heard a deep voice, almost a lament, uttering words they couldn't identify. One inmate claimed he heard his own name whispered out of thin air, even though he had no history with the man in Cell 3A. And when this kind of thing starts to repeat among different people who don't even know each other, something inside us begins to awaken, an ancient instinct, as if our body was saying, there's something here that cannot be ignored. If this topic resonates with you, if something in this story has ever given you that chill down your spine, share in the comments what touched you the most. It can be a memory, an opinion, or even a venting. Sometimes sharing what we feel is the only way to transform fear into understanding. And if you're still here, it's because this type of content also provokes you, unsettles you, and perhaps even makes you see criminal psychology through a different lens. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that, unfortunately, is still silenced in many places. So if you can, hit the like button. This shows that you want to see more real stories told with respect, depth, and humanity. And of course, subscribe to the channel to continue following these narratives that go beyond the obvious, where every detail can carry an unspoken truth, because what comes next will take you even deeper into the mystery of the cell that no one wanted to occupy. Behind the rusty door of Cell 3A was a man whom no one called by name. Inside, he was simply the Ghost. No document in the wing had an updated photo. His record was incomplete with torn pages, yet it was impossible not to notice his presence, not by sounds but by their absence. He neither asked for food nor cried for help. He didn't bang on the bars, he didn't react to the insults from other inmates. He merely observed, with sunken eyes and a calmness that was unsettling. It was as if he were waiting for something. Or someone. Those few who had the courage to speak to him said that the sensation was like conversing with someone who had already accepted their own death. But with one unsettling detail, he never admitted to the crime. He never claimed he was innocent either. When asked, he would simply smile faintly and say, "I am exactly where they want me to be." And this, coming from a supposed murderer, completely alters the atmosphere, because it ceases to be merely about guilt and punishment. It becomes a matter of someone else's decision, of control, of a hidden truth that perhaps no one was willing to face. What few knew was that before being arrested, he led a normal life. He worked as a night watchman in a psychiatric hospital. No records of violence, no history of outbursts. An ordinary man, almost invisible, until one night changed everything. 3 people died, and he was found unconscious at the crime scene. The evidence was flimsy, but there was an urgent need to pinpoint a culprit. The pressure from the media, collective fear, and the desire for quick answers made him the perfect target. A silent face in a system that loves convenient narratives. His incarceration was decided in less than 3 months. There was no thorough investigation, no complete psychiatric evaluation, just a verdict, guilty. And at that point, he vanished from the outside world, but became a permanent presence behind the prison walls, not through power or violence, but by the strength of an unresolved mystery. Guards avoided saying his name. Inmates changed cells just to avoid making eye contact with him in the cafeteria. This left marks, because fear, when it comes without explanation, spreads like an emotional epidemic. Who benefits when the official narrative is the only one allowed? And why did so many people prefer to forget that he existed? The impact goes beyond criminal justice. It touches the way we are conditioned to judge, accept, and move on, even when there are clear signs that something is out of place. It speaks to collective mentality about how silence is used as a strategy. And the cruelest part? Gradually, even the innocent begin to silence themselves for fear of being next. Cell 3A was, by definition, just another among dozens in a maximum security block, but as soon as you crossed the rusted gate, it felt like the air was denser, as if the very space was trying to expel anyone who dared to enter. The smell of the cell was something hard to describe. It wasn't exactly rot, but a suffocating mix of mold, oxidized metal, and a type of cold sweat that felt too old to be recent. The walls, all concrete, bore marks that were not in any report. Deep. Scratches, symbols etched with makeshift tools, words written backward. One of them repeated in various places, "Return." The floor was uneven, as if someone had tried to dig there. The ceiling light flickered even when newly replaced. Technicians stated that the circuit was fine, but none could stay long enough in the cell to verify it calmly. Even the most experienced staff avoided going in alone. Some would slide the meal tray through the crack without even looking inside. It was as if that space had become a living organism, reacting to human presence with a sort of silent rejection. A cell where no one could sleep properly, and where no one, absolutely no one, lasted more than 2 nights when sharing it with the ghost. These accounts became legend among the prisoners. They said that those who entered that cell came out different. One was mistakenly transferred there, stayed only 36 hours, and spent the next 6 months in total silence, refusing visits and even his own name. Another, who was serving time for fraud, snapped in the middle of the night and tried to pull his nails out with his teeth. And the strangest part, the ghost never reacted. He remained seated, staring blankly at the wall, as if watching something that only he could see. He touched no one, he spoke to no one, but the mere fact of sharing that space with him broke the minds of others. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject. Why did that space have such a psychological impact? What was there that transcended the physical and delved straight into the realm of perception? Criminal psychology shows us that extreme environments can amplify traumas, but there are also situations where the environment does not create the terror. It absorbs it. And perhaps that is what happened there. That cell became a repository of pain, of poorly made decisions, of the dirty backstories of justice, of revelations hidden behind fear. A space where the guilt of others took shape, and where the human mind was tested minute by minute. The crime that led the Phantom to prison was one of those cases that, at first glance, seemed far too neatly resolved to be real. A massacre at an abandoned psychiatric hospital, with 3 victims found in brutal conditions, signs of struggle, deep cuts, clear evidence of torture. The scene was chaotic, but something didn't add up. None of the bodies showed defensive wounds consistent with someone who would have fought back. Even worse, one of the victims was a former patient of the facility who, according to records, had died months before the incident. That's when everything started to fall apart. The night watchman, the only person present at the scene, was found unconscious, with light bruises and signs of sedation. When he came to, he claimed to remember nothing, or so he said. Instead of questioning what had actually happened there, the police rushed to name him as the culprit. The reasoning: he was the only one still alive, but none of the evidence held up the narrative with any real strength. The fingerprints were mixed with those of dozens of people who had passed through the place over the years. Part of the forensic evidence disappeared, and 2 key witnesses, maintenance workers, vanished during the process. Literally vanished. No resignation, no goodbyes, no trace. At the hearing, the prosecutor presented a ready-made version of events, as if the script had been written from the start. He claimed the guard had snapped, reliving old traumas, and had taken it out on the victims. But at no point was a motive made clear. There was no history of aggression, no psychological reports to back the alleged diagnosis. Even so, the sentence was swift, and the life sentence came as a relief to everyone involved. No one wanted to dig deeper. The case was too messy and the system needed closure, but the rush to wrap it all up left too much behind. Hasty decisions hide dangerous truths, especially when made by those too afraid to face the consequences. Now I want to go even deeper into this. What makes justice ignore the signs when they're so obvious? The answer often lies backstage, in silent agreements, in mistakes that can't be exposed, and in an institutional mindset that prefers protecting its image over confronting its own shadow. And when that happens, the ones who pay the price are the forgotten, the ones without a name, without a defense, and with no one willing to hear their side of the story. The case of the Phantom is an open wound in the system, a journey cut short for the sake of convenience where the fear of truth outweighed the desire for justice. Some people spend their whole lives studying human behavior and still aren't ready for certain encounters. That was exactly the case with Dr. Elias Montero, a forensic psychologist with nearly 2 decades of experience in psychiatric institutions and maximum security prisons. He had interviewed gang leaders, serial killers, and criminals so cold they could freeze an entire room. But the case of Corridor 3, specifically Cell 3A, stirred a different kind of unrest in him. It wasn't fear, it was a dark curiosity, a sense that something there broke the pattern, and he needed to see it with his own eyes. The first session happened on a regular morning, but nothing that followed was ordinary. Elias entered with all security protocols in place and his usual neutral posture. But the moment he laid eyes on the man in front of him, he felt something was deeply out of place. The Phantom sat with his back turned, as if he already knew the psychologist was coming. When he finally turned, he showed no surprise, no interest. He simply looked. A fixed, unsettling stare, as though he were studying Elias from the inside out. And the most disturbing part, he didn't say a single word. Subsequent sessions went on for weeks. Absolute silence. Elias asked questions, used techniques, explored visual memories, sounds, metaphors. Nothing worked. Until one day, almost by accident, he mentioned the word memory. In that moment, the inmate laughed for the first time, a dry, soundless laugh, and wrote in his notebook, "Who controls memory, controls the past. Who controls the past erases the truth. That was the first crack. And also, the beginning of a transformation in Elias's own perception. He began to see that silence not as resistance, but as a strategy. Now I want to go even deeper into this. What happens when someone is exposed for so long to a hostile environment that silence becomes a means of survival? The Phantom wasn't just a patient. He was a reflection of a system that would rather silence than explain. And for an experienced psychologist, that was shocking. Because what he discovered wasn't a criminal in denial, but a man who chose silence as the only way to preserve what was left of his identity. That's not common. It's a rare, devastating reaction, a raw response to institutionalized trauma. Inside, Cell 3A, the absence of words was never empty. That man's silence was full of meaning, as if every second of muteness was carefully constructed to send a message only the most observant could grasp. He never looked anyone directly in the eyes, yet always seemed to know when someone was watching. His movements were precise, almost like a choreographed routine where every step, every shift in breathing was intentional. Even in stillness, there was a presence, as if his quietness created a field of tension that forced everyone around him to face themselves. Psychologically, that kind of behavior isn't typical. There's a fine line between emotional detachment and total control of one's expression, and he held himself exactly at that threshold. Some might say it was a form of dissociation, an extreme defense mechanism against trauma the system refused to acknowledge. But the specialists who got close to him said it wasn't just survival. It was a choice, a kind of internal mastery, a decision to not play the game, to withhold any more pieces from the structure that had already taken everything from him. And that's where it all becomes even more complex. In this case, silence acted as language, an invisible language, built through calculated gestures and pauses that spoke louder than words. A slight turn of the head when a question was asked, a longer blink at certain words, a subtle clenching of fists when a name was mentioned, small clues that formed a pattern, a code that demanded emotional interpretation, not logical analysis. For those who study human behavior, this isn't just intriguing, it's a challenge. Because this was a mind that flipped the game. He didn't want to be read. He wanted to read those trying to decode him. And what if that silence was in fact resistance? A way to protect himself in a system where speaking had always been used against him. What we're seeing here might be the result of a deeply internal journey, one shaped by loss, where the only way to retain control over his identity was to stop explaining it. That changes everything. It changes how we judge, interpret, and even how we position ourselves in front of another's behavior. Because when silence becomes a strategy, every gesture becomes a revelation, even if no one's ready to understand it. Everything was going according to routine that morning, nothing unusual. Cell Block C received a new inmate transferred from another facility, a man known for being confrontational, aggressive, someone who didn't back down from threats. Due to an administrative error, or perhaps something more intentional than anyone wanted to admit, he was placed in Cell 3A alongside the Phantom. They said he laughed when he found out. He didn't believe the stories, thought they were just tales to scare rookies, like so many others passed around damp corridors and iron doors. He walked in with puffed chest and defiant eyes, like a fighter entering an arena. For the first few hours, things seemed strange, but not alarming. No noise, no calls. The guards carried out their rounds as if quietly hoping things wouldn't go wrong. But then, in the middle of the night, everything changed. Screams, loud banging on the bars, an alarm triggered by mistake, and then complete silence. When the containment team managed to open the cell, the new inmate was curled in a corner, sweating profusely. His eyes glassy, like he had seen something his mind couldn't process. No signs of aggression, not a scratch. But he trembled, muttering fragmented sentences, as if he had mentally regressed years in just minutes. He was immediately transferred to the medical wing, where he spent the following weeks under observation. He didn't talk about what had happened. He only whispered things like he knows too much and silence screams when you listen. From that point on, Cell 3A was sealed off, not officially, not by upper management, but because no one else wanted to risk repeating the experiment, not even the directors who until then had treated the Phantom as dead weight in the system. After that night, he stopped being just another inmate. He became a rupture, a sign that something had slipped out of control and that what was at stake might be far greater than anyone had imagined. What really breaks a mind in such a short time, it's not always physical violence. Sometimes it's the confrontation with a hidden truth, a perception that the brain is not ready to accept. Perhaps that inmate accessed something in that silence, something no one was meant to hear. The emotional transformation he underwent wasn't visible in reports, but it was clear in how he never returned to being the same. This raises a question that goes beyond criminology and enters the realm of what cannot be easily explained. There are experiences that don't fit into a report, but leave deep marks on those who go through them. Years after the incident that nearly led to the permanent deactivation of Cell 3A, a retired employee from the old records department decided to write a personal account. He was one of those invisible men of the system who spent decades among files and drawers, observing everything without ever being heard. In the manuscript, he described a mistake, or as he preferred to call it, a deliberate exchange of identities involving two inmates at the time of transfer between prisons. One was the true perpetrator of a brutal crime committed in a decommissioned psychiatric hospital. The other hand was the guard, the same one who became known as the Ghost of Corridor 3. The one that no one wanted to investigate. The one that everyone preferred to forget. The documents attached to that text were simple but devastating. Incompatible dates, diverging signatures, contradictory medical records. A pattern of inconsistency that was only not evident because no one was really looking for it. The truth was there, buried under years of poorly done bureaucracy and hasty decisions. And the cruelest part, everyone who had the power to reopen the case was either already retired, removed, or dead. The system moved on as if nothing had happened, as if a life hadn't been pushed into an abyss for convenience. The institutional mindset, the one that prefers to resolve quickly rather than understand thoroughly, sealed the fate of the man who today is no longer clearly identified. The absence of an official identity, coupled with the silence he chose to maintain, turned his figure into a blind spot in the prison's own history. And here comes an uncomfortable reflection. How many people are serving sentences for crimes they didn't commit? How many have been forgotten because the noise of the truth is more disturbing than the comfort of a well-told lie? When an entire system closes its eyes to preserve its own image, the error is not an accident. It becomes part of the structure. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this matter. What if that exchange hadn't been a mistake? What if it were a calculated maneuver, crafted behind the scenes by someone who needed to make the real culprit disappear? An inmate who might have known too much, someone with dangerous connections or information that couldn't be made public? In that case, the silence of the ghost would take on another weight. He wouldn't just be silent. He would be protecting something, perhaps by choice, perhaps out of fear, perhaps by realizing too late that the only way to survive, that truth was to bury it along with his own voice. Write this down. There are revelations that are scarier than mistakes. I want to know how this part of the story resonates with you. After the documents came to light, Cell 3A remained closed for a while. Officially, they said it was under renovation. But those living inside knew that wasn't the case. The ghost simply vanished. There was no record of transfer nor any official movement in the internal systems. No agent saw him being taken away. No vehicle was identified leaving with him. He just disappeared, as if he had never existed. What remained? In his place was the void, a locked space ignored during rounds, swept only out of obligation. A place where dust accumulated, but fear remained alive like a memory trapped within the walls. Some say he was killed, that there was a silent operation to erase any trace, any possibility of future investigation. Others believe he was secretly removed, taken to a custody hospital, or even handed over to an institution that knew the truth and wanted to cover everything up. But the scariest thought is that he may have just been forgotten, lost amidst the bureaucracy of a system that fails people with the same coldness it uses to file papers. When you enter a place like that and refuse to speak, react, or fit in, you become an easy number to erase. And time in this context does not heal. It merely conceals. It's hard to imagine what transpired inside that cell in his last days. There. If he felt that something was about to happen, if he accepted it, or if he was just another piece moved by decisions that never came to the surface. The fact is that the ghost became a name without a body, a shadow that still walks. Through the conversations of former employees, always spoken in a lower tone, no one knows where he is. And deep down, maybe no one wants to know, because discovering that would mean confronting everything that was done and what was allowed to happen. And not everyone has the emotional structure for that. Because the disappearance of the ghost is not just a dark detail of a forgotten case. It is a portrait of what society prefers to ignore. The lives that vanish without a trace. The mistakes that no one pays for. The truths that no one wants to face. When an entire system silences, the consequence is not just injustice. It's the normalization of it. And that's why his story remains alive. Not because we know what happened, but because the absence of answers has become the loudest cry of this journey. A constant echo that transcends time, files, and consciousness. When the story of the ghost reaches its end, or at least the point where the records stop, what remains is not just the doubt about what happened to him. What lingers, in fact, is a brutal reflection of the system itself. Because the most unsettling part of this story is not the locked cell, the absolute silence, or the lost documents. What frightens the most is realizing how many other cells are occupied today by people carrying similar stories. People who have been forgotten, judged without time, silenced for convenience, punished for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. People who have become numbers, labels, statistics. Real, living, isolated ghosts, invisible. The structure of the penal system was created to punish, but it is rarely willing to understand. When an innocent person is thrown into a space where no one wants to listen, they quickly learn that speaking up can cost even more, and silence becomes protection, a shield, armor. Every time a judicial error is shelved, the message is clear. Admitting failures is more dangerous than committing them, and this type of mindset creates a culture where the truth is only useful if it fits into the pre-established mold. When it doesn't fit, it's discarded, hidden behind the scenes, and with it, entire lives fade away in silence. It's hard to admit, but the system doesn't make mistakes alone. It is fueled by decisions, by political pressure, by a society that often prefers to see culprits quickly than to deal with the nuances of a fair process. Justice should be about balance, but when it is driven by fear, haste, and self-interest, what is built is not a courtroom, it's a theater. And on this stage, those who try to step outside the script are often removed without applause, without explanations, without the right to come back. The journey of the ghost makes us think of all the stories that don't make headlines but carry the same weight, the same pain, the same silence. How many voices have been silenced for not fitting into the expected format? How many are there today, living their own sentences without ever having been truly heard? The absence of listening within the prison system is not a technical failure. It is a direct consequence of a structure that was not made to listen, but to contain. And perhaps that's why the silence of the ghost has been so troubling. Because he was not loud. He did not react. He simply existed. And even so, his presence was a discomfort to everyone around. Because deep down, the unspoken truth always has more impact than the well-told lie. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story truly touched you. And that says a lot about the kind of perspective you have on the world. So leave a simple phrase in the comments, just so I know you stayed with me until the end. I'm with you until the end. It may seem like little, but it creates a silent network of people who also care about the stories that no one wants to hear. If this content made sense to you, click the like button. It shows that it's worth continuing to bring reflections like this, with depth, respect, and that dose of humanity that doesn't fit within numbers. And if you want to follow more content in this vein, subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss when the next story knocks at the door with new questions and new silences. Don't forget to check out our complete playlist and also see the story of a secret that has never come to light, which is appearing for you. Stay with me in this other story that might also surprise you.